joining me right now to discuss this is Morgan Thompson. She's with us here. Also, Sarah Isgur Flores, the RNC Deputy Communications Director, and Bridget Todd, a Democratic strategist. It's great to have everybody with us for this discussion.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Sarah, first, over to you here. What was your take on the president's speech last night? Isn't the real issue of this reforming the tax code?
I think the real issue here is that the president's anti-jobs policies have been driving these companies away. You look at the 2013 list, the 2014 list, the top 10 states for pro-business and job growth are all run by Republican governors, but this president refuses to work with Republicans, and so you see companies flocking to states like Texas, flocking away from states. The three worst were California, Illinois, and New York.
Now, Bridget, in the bite we played, we hear the president calling for both sides of the aisle to come together. Yesterday, at another event, he said, "I will say for all the Democrats around here, I'm not overly partisan." Now, that's a very different tone from the pen and phone Obama. Do you think he's a changed man, or are these just empty words?
You know, I think situations like this, I think in some cases, certainly, I'm always all for bipartisanship where there are bipartisan solutions. But I think that, some issues where we're just sort of fatigued and we can't seem to get anything done, I think there is some need to sort of just move things forward. But I'm all for bipartisan solutions where they exist. And I think Obama is a president who, when you can move that way, sees it that way as well.
All right. Well, Bridget, will someone point to the recent fundraiser and many of these fundraisers as a sign that perhaps voter fatigue might be setting in? They highlight things like no listed price for tickets for his appearances in San Francisco. And Bridget, are we seeing donors maybe starting to get a little bit sick of this president?
I don't know that is indicative of that. Barack Obama, as a president, has never had any problem raising money. He's quite a good fundraiser. I don't see that as a problem. I don't see it as indicative of any kind of fatigue. I think it's just, I wouldn't call it that.
Well, there are some issues. The president's approval ratings continue to go down. We're not quite at George W. Bush levels yet, but not looking good. And, the fundraising trips for the president, they wouldn't be complete, of course, without one of his favorite lines. And on his stump speech, the president saying, quote, all we hear about is phony scandals. Scandal is a great show, so they obstruct and they obfuscate and they bamboozle and they sometimes don't tell exactly what's the truth. That was a euphemism. So, the president clearly wanting to weigh into these waters and dust it up a little bit with Republicans. Is that really a wise move with everything on the president's plate right now?
I actually agree with the president in this situation. I think that we have legitimate scandals in our country right now. We have legitimate issues that folks would be right to be paying attention to. But I wonder, is every issue, every gaffe, every speech something that needs to be, spun around in the media cycle for weeks? Probably not. When we have real scandals, real things we should be focusing on.
Well, Sarah, I wanted to ask you something else about what the president said yesterday. You mentioned those states, California, Illinois, the president's home state, others, having a lot of trouble. A lot of the economic growth in this country is coming from places like Ohio and Florida and Texas who have Republican governors. But the president also mentioned yesterday, he brought up the issue of minimum wage increases, saying that states like Maryland, who have raised the minimum wage or are talking about it, have seen a job growth boom of sorts. What was your take on the president's comments?
Well, I think that Republicans in particular see the minimum wage as a starting point. We want people getting high-paying jobs, and the president's inability to see anything beyond minimum wage for job growth when we have a 1.7% economic growth, that's hurting working families. The minimum wage isn't going to fix that. We need him to step up to the plate and work with Republicans to actually implement pro-growth policies so that we can get people into better than minimum wage jobs.
Now, Bridget, we also want to talk about Paul Ryan's poverty plan. Slate says the plan is paternalistic. They write in Party that many liberals may have preconceived notions about Ryan. You might think he's a wild-eyed Ayn Rand devotee hell-bent on dismantling the safety net, and that the top action item on his daily planner is to give to the rich and take from the poor, like a cackling reverse Robin Hood. What would you say to that?
So I've actually read the piece, and I think that, I think you might be surprised by my take on it. The piece actually makes this great point about Ryan's plan, that he's actually talking about the poor, which is sort of a step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. The idea behind the piece is that the poor need very sort of common sense policies that's going to help them. They don't need paternalism. They don't need to have their hand held. They need dignity. And I think that even the fact that Ryan is sort of just talking about this and making a plan for this, I think is a good thing. I'm not someone who's very cynical. I think that Ryan actually is interested in helping the poor. I'm not someone who thinks that he's this sort of caricature of a rich guy who hates the poor. I think it's the fact that he's even talking about it is great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you go. I mean, of course, we're always hoping for a little conflict, and we're not going to get any on this issue here, guys. But let's talk a little bit more about Ryan's plan here. And Sarah, I want to go to you because Ryan has, as we mentioned, been criticized in the past. Slate brought that up in the article here. But this is something that the Republican Party certainly needs to discuss. Closing the income gap, making sure the middle class feels like they have a way forward. Is Paul Ryan, is he kind of gaining his feet here and understanding a better way to broach this issue with the American public?
I think he's a great messenger for this. He's been traveling around the country, really listening to people, hearing what's going on. It's not just an income gap that we have, it's an opportunity gap. And like he said, he may not have all the answers, but he wants to start a conversation. And I think that is a great start. And I think Americans are going to see some great ideas.
Sarah, going to you first since we have you. I'm curious, we keep hearing about the disappearance of a middle class. Do you think that's true?
I think the middle class is being squeezed. They're being squeezed by Obamacare on the one side, and they're being squeezed by a shrinking economy on the other. I don't think America can possibly be a strong country if we don't have a strong middle class. Mm-hmm. But we've got to get things back on track, and the president jetting off to fundraisers while the economy isn't growing and we have, massive world conflict, and he's getting a burger and photo ops, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me.
Well, Bridget, I can't let you get away with that eye roll without having you check in for folks at home. And of course, you're a Democrat, so we like these eye rolls. But go ahead, weigh in. What was that eye roll all about?
That eye roll was about, listen, I am the first person to say that I think that the amount of fundraising that goes on in electoral politics needs to be addressed. I think that's true across the board. I think the American people would agree with me. However, this idea that Barack Obama is doing it worse, we forget that back in 2004, President Bush was accused of misusing Air Force One for re-election fundraising, right? This idea that Barack Obama is the first president to ever do a lot of traveling for fundraising while in office is just absurd.
And Sarah, I want to get your take on this because when I look at this, I'm with Bridget here. I'm kind of maybe disgusted by all the fundraising that goes on, but not necessarily disgusted at the president for doing it. And what I see happening right now with all these pundits talking about this and criticizing the president for these fundraising swings is a bunch of sound bites that are going to come back the next time we have a Republican in office, and they're going to do the same thing because this is really the reality of our political system today. Do you disagree?
I'm sure they will come back, but I think there's a time and a place. I think we all understand that politicians need to fundraise. That's not the criticism here. The criticism is that it doesn't project a lot of strength to Putin when our president is talking about scandal and is in Hollywood and raising money from donors behind closed doors. I think that's the issue here. We have a lot going on right now. There was a plane shot down, and we have Israel and Gaza, and he did not even move his schedule. I think that's tough to justify right now.
Morgan, what do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. With all that's going on in the world, this just seems ridiculous that he's quoting scandal and going to $32,000 a plate dinners. I find it a bit disgusting.
Well, another problem I'll just add is that he adds in one speech on the economy, his pivot to the economy for the 53rd time. And that's how he gets the taxpayers to fund a lot of this trip. So it's also hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're paying for him to go talk about scandal and have photo ops with burgers and playing pool.
A lot of it's very confusing, and for folks who are inside the Beltway, folks who cover this type of stuff, the speech that Sarah was talking about is often referred to as the fig leaf. If you're from, Adam and Eve going back, covering up what you don't want to see, the trip, and that is the fundraiser there. But we thank both of Sarah and Bridget for joining us here to discuss this issue, guys, and we'll have you back, of course, for more on this topic and others.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's nice to see everybody get along.
Well, we can find some agreement, and Paul Ryan very much playing up the fact that his plan is bipartisan. It's an opportunity for everybody to work together, and we heard some Democratic support for that here on the program here today. So we're going to try to break some ground, Morgan, on these issues. Much more to come here on America's Forum today. And again, we will get to your comments coming up here very shortly. Not too late to write into us. You can find us on all of these options right here on Twitter at NewsmaxTV, hashtag America's Forum. You can send us comments directly via email, newsmaxtv.com/comment, or find us on Facebook, facebook.com/NewsmaxTV.